This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London.
And the first speaker is Sophie Meincke. I just mentioned that as you'll see, she's a collaborator on my ERC project, and one of the conditions for being on that is you have to speak the truth. So she's going to say true things, so you should pay special attention.
Thank you. Thanks for the nice introduction. So I'm trying to tell the truth now. Our topic today is personal identity and biological identity. And I have been working on personal identity for many years, and the more I thought about this problem, the more actually I got interested in biological approaches to it, so in animalism in a broad sense. Now, when I started my research on that, animalism was hardly more than an outsider position. However, this has massively changed during the last decade, due to the groundbreaking work of some metaphysicians, some of whom are present at this conference, which I'm really pleased about. Now, what I'm going to do in the next 40 minutes is critically engage with the view I actually have learned quite a lot from, and with his basic assumptions I'm strongly sympathetic with. However, I do think that animalism could do better than it actually does, and I will try hard to explain why and also how. Now, what does the problem of personal identity consist in? Imagine I wake up in the morning, in my bed, and rubbing my eyes utter the sentence, I'm waking up right now, am identical with the person who went to bed yesterday. Now, we might want to know whether this actually is true, and if so, or if it's not true, why not? So this is what the debate on personal identity is about. A satisfying theory of personal identity would answer the question, what does it take for a person to persist through time? And it would do so by formulating truth criteria for diachronic identity statements, such as that one which I just mentioned. So it would specify necessary and sufficient conditions for a person's identity through time. Or so it seems. Well, as a matter of fact, metaphysicians are deeply divided on how to account for personal identity and whether there's such a thing at all. The pivotal bone of contention here is whether there are actually any such necessary and sufficient conditions of personal identity. And this is whether or not personal identity can be reduced to certain empirical relations. And here we have on one hand side reductionists who answer this question with yes, and non-reductionists who say no. Well, these two positions which dominate the debate are commonly also opposed to one another as the so-called complex view versus this simple view. And this referring to the disagreement on whether personal identity is a complex phenomenon, which allows for further informative analysis, or whether it is rather a simple fact which cannot be informatively analyzed any further. Now, as you can see, I have put animalism right in the middle between these two positions, and you will later understand why. For the moment, I have to say something about the traditional debate, because animalism is, as I already mentioned, kind of a newcomer in this debate, and I have to set up the scene, so to speak. So I will in particular talk about the psychological version of reductionism, which counts itself into the Ryan Standard and Carpethian psychological reductionism, and about the deep further fragmentalistic dualism version of non-reductionism. So the basic idea of standard psychological reductionism is that psychological continuity is what makes us persist through time. So when I wake up in my bed in the morning, let's say I'm really identical with the person who went to bed the evening before, then this is because there's some ongoing stream of consciousness, some series of interrelated mental events, let's say desires, wishes, any mental states you can think of, which connects us. And this is what makes us identical. Now, the idea of standard in the standard view was, of course, the identity which we are talking about here is the numerical, strict numerical identity. Well, unfortunately, this position faces a whole bunch of challenges in the form of hypothetical puzzle cases, which have been vividly debated in the last century. It started all like middle of last century, going back to John Locke's, you all know. And one of these cases, I can only focus here on one for reasons of time, is the brain tumor. Imagine two hemispheres of my brain transplanted, removed half of the skull, and transplanted into two skulls of two different living bodies. And let's assume just for a moment that having only one hemisphere is sufficient for having a normal psychological life. Now, if the proponents of standard psychological reductions, let's call them neo-Lockeans, if they are right in assuming that psychological continuity is constitutive for identity in the sense of numerical identity, then we are in serious trouble here. This is because psychological continuity connects me to both of my successors, so that I would have to be identical with both, and it would also further imply, due to the transitivity of the relation of numerical identity, that these two guys would also be identical with one another. So it doesn't seem that they get any convincing answer in this picture to the question, who will I be once the operation has been carried out? Now, neo-Lockeans have tried to cure this difficulty by introducing so-called non-branching clause that would say only if there's no second candidate would be me, I would survive this scenario, otherwise I would be dead. Well, unfortunately there are some problems with this position. First, it makes my identity extrinsic matter, but it also seems rather ad hoc. It's just an ad hoc stipulation, so it's hard to accept it. And in fact, together with other problems this view is encountering, it has provoked two counter reactions which themselves are opposing. The first one is Harvard's version of reductionism, called Harvardian reductionism. Harvard says, well, actually, identity is not what matters. I simply survive as two people because what matters for survival is just psychological continuity itself. And this implies that persons are just hundreds of humans. There is another position, and this is the non-reductionist view, which says that no, it's not possible, I can't survive with two people, that doesn't make sense. If we want to keep identity in the sense of numerical identity, and now given that the empirical relations are here both the same, we have to conclude our identity cannot be an empirical fact. It must be a deep further fact. And so there's a slogan, the person goes where the soul goes, it's Richard Swinburne's view. We have to assume the persons are mental substances. Now I think that the result of this is a dilemma. I see the whole debate, the traditional debate stuck in. And this is basically, I guess, neither reductionism nor non-reductionism provide a convincing answer on the question what it takes a person to persist through time. So on the one hand side, we have reductionists which try to give us an informative account, but unfortunately end up with the thesis, well, actually there is no personal identity. On the other hand, we have non-reductionists which keep identity, that's nice, but unfortunately do so by exactly not explaining it at all. So it seems we would have to agree on either eliminating or mystifying our identity, which isn't a great choice and a good reason to fall into skeptical despair. Now, maybe it is too early to give up. Non-reductionism and reductionism within the traditional debate both agree that our identity is some sort of mental fact. So they both subscribe to what I would like to call mentalism about personhood. And maybe it's not the right way to approach them, as it completely ignores the fact that we, you and I, are some sort of animals, that is, organisms of a certain kind. Well, and maybe we are better off by acknowledging this fact. This thought is actually the birth of animalism. So animalists think we are not only accidentally animals, we are essentially animals. And therefore, our identity conditions are not psychological, but purely biological. Personal identity is biological identity. And because of this, and this is a very radical conclusion which falls from it, we should actually stop debating and worrying about personal identity in the strict traditional sense. We should replace the traditional question, what are the persistence conditions of persons, with a new animalist question, what are the persistence conditions of human animals? And this also implies that we have to shift the focus from the social concept of person to the social animal. Now, it seems animalism is thereby, when trying to pursue this program, not doubt that the identity they're talking about is strict numerical identity, and at the same time, they seem to provide an informative analysis of that. And I think, well, if that were really true, that animalism would look like a really promising, attractive account, as it would achieve something the psychological theories of personal identity failed to achieve. Namely, give us an account of our identity that neither eliminates nor mystifies it. So, is animalism the desired way out of the dilemma of personal identity? Now, in what follows, I will share with you my doubts on this by defending three critical key claims about animalism. The first one is that animalism has not provided yet a satisfyingly elaborated account of biological identity. So rather than telling us more about the persistence conditions the sort or animal is supposed to have, animalists so far have been mainly concerned with making this fundamental assumption that actually the sort of animal is the sort that we should look at comprehensible. So they basically have just been busy with justifying the fundamental claim that we are only accidentally persons, but essentially animals. Now I think this is understandable given the historical prevalence of mentalistic views of the human person, together with the prevalence of psychological theories of identity. However, I think in order to make judgments about the appropriateness of the animalist perspective on our identity, it would be helpful to get to know a bit more on what it means to rely on biological identity in this respect. So what does biological identity, according to animalism, consist in? Still, this claim is harmless, as you might suspect that actually the weakness it claims is easily to be remedied by just elaborating what needs to be elaborated once the theoretical groundwork has been laid. You might further guess that this is just also part of the idea of this conference, launching such an elaboration process. Well, this is true, and actually brings me to my second critical and not so harmless claim. Here the idea is, well, okay, when elaborating their views on biological identity, metaphysicians evidently should make sure that they take into account also what biologists say about biological identity. Well, and it seems to me that in the present form of animalism, this requirement is not sufficiently met. More on the contrary, I have the worry that those explanations, which the actual explanations of biological identity we actually find in animalism so far, are more or less at odds with biology. And this for the reason that they seem to be largely reliant on a substance view of the organism. So it seems to me that actually if identity is not eliminated, it is rather mystified. And so we would have here, rather than finding the desired way out of the first identity dilemma, just a reiteration. So the dilemma would return. Well, having said that metaphysicians are well advised to take into account what biologists and also philosophers of biology say about biological identity, I think it's reasonable to further require them to make sure that they work on a theoretical groundwork which is suitable for fitting in the empirical findings, which they should take notice of, rather than precluding this from the very start. And this is my third, admittedly radical claim. Animalism cannot provide a satisfyingly elaborated account of biological identity which does not reiterate the dilemma unless it replaces the fundamental ontological framework it operates on. So my thesis here is that the fundamental ontological framework animalism operates on is what I call thing ontology, and I will argue that thing ontology should give way to process ontology, and animalism can do much better if transforming itself into processual animalism. So this is the program of the remainder of my talk, which follows from it. So I will give a critical survey of existing animalistic accounts of biological identity. I will confront them with challenges from biology. I will demonstrate the return of the dilemma, and I will identify the thing ontological roots of the dilemma. And actually, I have to say, this will take the most and bigger part of what I'm going to say. But I will give you also a brief outline of processual animalism. Especially, I will focus here on the processual account of biological identity, which is in accordance with what systems biology says about organisms, and I will briefly indicate how this provides a solution to the dilemma. Okay, need some oxygen. Good. So far as I can see, animalists have put forward three different criteria of biological identity. And the first and most obvious one is the biological continuity criteria. Here's the formulation. Two organisms identified at two different times are numerically identical if they are connected by biological continuity. So I have put here in brackets also, I think the formulation which I gave here is very close to what you can find in Eric's writings, but also other versions of the same criterion in other animalist writings. Well, what is biological continuity? It is the continuity of life processes, the continuity of vital functions, so in another way Eric puts the matter. And here, sorry, that was too quick. The idea is that when we focus on the continuity of life processes, we get rid of one problem. We can understand, make comprehensible how it is possible that each of us once had been a fetus and might lapse into a persistent vegetative state without thereby ceasing to exist. And this is something, according to Eric Olson, the psychological theorists couldn't explain, because assuming, as Eric does, that neither fetuses nor PBS patients have any psychological properties or states, it would seem we would just either not yet exist or stop existing. So, well, this is nice. It might seem like like a convincing case for animalism, but we shouldn't overlook that there's one problem which we don't get rid of by just relying on biological rather than psychological continuity. And this is the branching problem. Now, just to be sure, unlike the puzzle cases discussed for psychological theories of personal identity, the branching which I presented earlier, branching or fission is in biology, not just a logical possibility. It's not about thought experiments. It rather happens all the time. So it's as real as anything can be, and it's ubiquitous too. Think of sound, which all the things we already discussed. And so, for example, it's only example one which has been debated in the metaphysical literature. Well, I might wonder, given the possibility of twinning, and given that we want to assume identities to be meant to mean the numerical identity, but I ever have been a zygote. How could that be without, getting into the same troubles as in the scenarios discussed earlier? Well, the anonymous answer given by animalists is, well, no, actually, I haven't been a zygote. I rather start existing not before 14 days after conception, which is the time when there's no possibility of twinning anymore. Well, I think this move raises some troubles. And the first is that, well, it seems, let's say there's no twin. I mean, in the case of twinning, you might find it somewhat kind of facially flawed and say, well, okay, I just started as one of the moments. But now assume there's no twinning. Then we have to claim that even though there's no observable disruption of the continuity of life processes, I start existing just at some point, because otherwise there would be this problem, the logical problems coming from the possibility of twinning. And so my problem with this is, it seems rather ad hoc to stipulate this. Well, because I have to assume there's first an entity, the zygote, and this is then somehow replaced with a new entity, the fetus, somehow the embryo, the morula in this case, and well, without any difference, any disruption of the continuity. Well, you might think, well, maybe I could just introduce a non-branching clause, just in the case, as in the case of the psychological reductionism scenario. But I think actually it's not no less at all. So then here the idea would be, only if no twinning occurs, I would start existing as a zygote, otherwise I would start existing at one of the morulas. I mean, there's no intrinsic reason for assuming that. The life processes will be the same, and also it would be rather bizarre. So it seems that the beginning of my existence would be determined only retrospectively. I think altogether just shows us that what we need would be an intrinsic explanation of why, despite appearances, the cases in question are actually not cases of biological continuity, which is something how I interpret what Eric thinks, based on his book. I don't know what he thinks now. Or why biological continuity, in fact, is not sufficient for the numerical identity of organisms, which is the position taken by von Inwagen, and what else there is. So, well, you would need to know that. I would like just to mention briefly, without going into detail, further problems for biological continuity criterion. One has to do with chimerism. That's when two zygotes merge into one, so it's cases of fusion. Happens also frequently in humans, as we know meanwhile. Or think of budding, where one part of the body develops into a new organism. Here I have a picture of what happens in yeast, but there's also the nice example of the starfish, which occasionally drops off the leg, which then becomes a new starfish. I guess what this shows is that biological continuity here is in no better position than psychological continuity, just for the matter of fact that it's a continuity relation, right? It's the same logic properties here. And so it seems that biological continuity alone cannot guarantee numerical identity. So if it is meant to do this job, then we would actually have to involve other further perceptions. Okay, that's the second criterion of biological identity, which was proposed by Eric Olson again. This goes like that. Two organisms identified at two different times are numerically identical if their life functions are regulated by the same brain cell. Now, one question is whether this is meant to be a sufficient or also a necessary condition. I mean, if necessary, then we would have an analogous problem, because nobody of us would ever have been an embryo, because embryos don't have brain stems. But maybe this isn't so bad. The more pressing problems is that it seems that in order to successfully apply it, we would need to know what the identity conditions for brain stems are. And this isn't actually a trivial matter. So given Eric's conviction that an artificial brainstem wouldn't do the job of maintaining my identity, I might wonder, what about a brainstem which is partly artificial and partly natural? So, and also it's just as a matter of fact, brainstems as any other physical objects are subject to possible fission. So I could imagine all sorts of fission scenarios which would cause problems for this view. Well, but then it seems if we just take brainstem identity for granted, we would explain identity in terms of identity, which is circular, and also hyperbole, that would attribute a kind of essence-like function to the brainstem, saying something like, well, we are essentially as somehow brainstems. And then the brainstem would define us as, you know, any other essence would define what the substance is, so that we would end up with the substance of the organism. There's another problem with this view, that is that it might be empirically false, that life requires a certain central organ of maintenance, that this is the brainstem. So it actually, as far as you know, Eric has, in the light of this objection, meanwhile abandoned this criteria. So it leaves us back to the question, well, if we can't refer here to biological continuity, nor to brainstem identity, what else? And there's a third criterion, and I guess actually this is the most important for animals, and it's the same life criterion. It says for any organism X and Y, X equal Y if and only if X's life is Y's life. Or less technical, two organisms identified at 2 different times, numerically identical if they share the same life. And you will find this in Van Inwagen, also Wiggins, who will refer back to Locke. You wouldn't find it in post-Snow because he thinks that life is necessary for being an organism or persistence laws. Now I think the problem with this is that it's no less circular than the brain stem criteria. We again have a situation where we would need to know what are the identity conditions of life. Otherwise it would somehow seem that we would, in order to know whether or not we have the same life in a given situation, already to know, we would need to know whether or not we have the same organism. Also, biological continuity is of no help here. So we might think, well, maybe is biological continuity what defines the conditions of identity of life? Well, no. This is here the point made by Peter van Inwagen. Biological continuity is only necessary but not sufficient for the identity of life because of these scenarios like twinning, where, as animalists assume, when given that I start not as a zygote but as a morula, obviously there is biological continuity between the zygote and the morulus, but I still start existing at a later point, so there's a different life. Okay, if so, what then is sufficient for the identity of life? And now, Peter van Inwagen's answer here is astonishingly nothing. Nothing is sufficient for the identity of life, because life is somehow, the identity of life, a primitive concept. So we have to rely on the concept of life when spelling out the identity conditions of organisms without the possibility to informatively spell out the identity conditions of life. So, in a sense, Van Inwagen is happy to admit that there's a kind of circularity here, but he thinks it's a circularity which we can't avoid. So he says, well, of course, when we try to explain the identity of X in terms of the identity of Y, you might ask further and say, well, what about the identity conditions of Y? Okay, and we could explain the identity of Y also in terms of the identity of Z. But we can't do this at infinitum, so at one point, we just have to rely on something whose identity we have to take for granted. And Van Inwagen thinks, in the case of the identity of organisms, this is the identity of life. And he further thinks that this is harmless, and in the sense that actually it doesn't render the same life criteria uninformative, and this is because life appears to be well-integrated. Now, let's focus a while. I mean, this idea that life is well-integrated figures very prominently in Meincke's thought, and maybe to explain to the non-metaphysicians in this room, Meincke's theories have great impact on metaphysical debates. So it's really something many people talk about, and yeah, it's just a kind of authority. Well, so what does Peter von Däniken think about life? He thinks that life is a homeodynamic storm of particles, or simples, which has a self-maintaining structure, just as some storm, whatever, the red one on Jupiter. It constantly draws particles in and expels others, but nevertheless retains the overall structure. It is also well integrated because it is jealous, and this is actually a very most important idea here. It's just in the same way as you cannot serve, that's in the metaphor he uses, in two armies at the same time, unless one is a subdivision of the other. In the same way, it's not possible that any given set of particles constitutes at the same time two lives, unless one life is subordinate to the other. So here the example would be the lives of my cells are subordinate to my life. And he also uses in this context the metaphor of the Shanghaian Club, where the members are recruited against their wills actually to work for the club's purposes, and then once they are out of any use anymore, they are expelled. This clearly alludes to metaphysicians. And so the life makes out of one out of many and can serve as a principle of innovation. And this idea that life is this kind of individuating power then motivates his famous special composition thesis, according to which apart from organisms there aren't any composite objects, which is a very radical claim, saying it's only living beings are composite objects, otherwise only elementary particles exist. And also the uniqueness claim that there's always a one-to-one relation between organisms and life. I have to admit that I don't really understand or find this argumentation convincing. And this is not only for the reason I can't quite see how the idea that life is well integrated saves the same life criteria from not being harmlessly uninformative. My worry is more, well, it strikes me that the very presumption that life is well integrated is not a straightforward thing. And once we have a look at what biology tells us about life and organism, I think we are confronted here with challenges to Meincke's view, and these have interestingly to do directly with the fact that life is much less about suppression and much more about cooperation. This is evidenced by the evolution of multi-cellular organisms. So we have heard already something about this in the talks before. So symbiotic theory and colonial theory both tell us that multicellular organisms arose from the cooperation of different unicellular organisms, whether of the same species or different species. And this matches very well the fact that we still have intermediate stages, such as modular or colonial organisms. And here's again the coral reef as an example. Corals live in groups of colonies of polyps, which are physically connected, and each polyp is like a sac-like animal. Okay. And so, well, because the life streams obviously go through the whole, so they are connected, so life goes through all of them, but at the same time the single polyps can wander off and found new colony or they die and they reproduce. So when we raise the question here, whether what is their organism and how many lives and how many organisms are there, we might just say, well, maybe it is as true to say there's one organism hosting many lives, or many organisms participating in one and the same life. So it's just not as clear as one might think. Another case, of course, is the symbiosis. I go very quickly through this, especially obligate forms of mutualism, where both parts symbionts benefit from one another and cannot do without the other, so we might think this is actually two organisms sharing one life, or the superorganism, where we might think it's like also many organisms sharing one life, or many organisms, many lives making up the super life, which however does not suppress the single life completely. That would be another version of looking at it. Well, one might think in the light of real biology, Van Inwijk's view on life looks quite naive. But I think it actually matches very well with what philosophers used to think about what organisms are like. And this is substance ontology. So the claim would be that what ultimately underlines animalist thinking on organisms is the view of the organism as a substance, as a well-integrated discrete particular whose identity is determined by some intrinsic essential principle which cannot be spelled out further. And so of course then it's not a surprise that Van Inwijk seems to think that the identity of life is primitive. Of course you can't empirically spell out the essence of a substance, so you just have to presuppose it, just as Aristotle presupposes the identity of the soul, which he believed would individuate substances. And actually there's a passage in Van Inwijk's book where he explicitly compares his notion of life with the notion of Aristotle's notion of the soul. But if this is the case, then I think clearly animalism here relapses into non-reductionism because we don't get informative explanation of what it takes us and other organisms to persist for time. And now you see why I put animalism in the middle between these two positions, because it's actually not so different from the hylomorphistic neo-Aristotelian theories, which obviously involve substance ontology. You might even want to say if animalism is to be clear, it should coincide, or actually coincides with this view, something David is probably quite sympathetic with. Now, looking back at the three criteria, we find that relying on biological continuity rather than psychological continuity is no better with regard to the problems faced by the psychologically enhanced cross-identity. Numerical identity is safe only if the biological criteria is supplemented with substance ontological assumptions, as involved in the same life, which is also the Grayson criterion. So avoiding animalism, elevativism, business as it comes at the price of mysticism, so we end up with the same dilemma. And I think this is not a good result because we don't get a satisfying account of the persistence of living beings. So we might say, well, animalism doesn't keep its promise, or seemingly informative explanation turned out to be at odds with biology, so animalism is unscientific. We end up with a platitude: organisms or animals persist as long as they are alive. It's boring and irrelevant. And if the persistence of life were indeed a primitive concept, we could not learn anything from empirical science that keeps the organisms alive. So this malevolent observer might think, well, that's ridiculous. Now, I indicated earlier in my talk that I think that this disastrous diagnosis is avoidable because it is caused by the fact that animalism operates on the wrong ontological framework. And now I have to do very quickly this point. On first glance, you might think, well, where does this come from that the dilemma returns? I think it comes from a very disharmonic combination of an Aristotelian substance concept on the one hand and atomism on the other. So you might remember Van Inwijk thinks that an organism is composed of elementary particles, and just because there's a life, it's not the case that the composition fails, but it really is one unifying option. Otherwise, we will end up only with elementary particles. So, looking back in history, we find these are competing views. Aristotle exactly introduced his notion of substance in order to refute atomism, but at the same time, both views resemble each other in one respect. And this is that they both take things to be the building blocks of reality. So either we have bigger things composed of smaller things called substances, or we have smaller things, just as smaller things. And this is parallel with what we found in psychological theories. We also had mental substances on the one hand and bundles of mental atomic events on the other, which shows that the whole debate is in the grip of thing ontology. However, I think given the examples which I showed from biology, after thinking about it for a longer time, organisms are neither substance things nor bundles of atom things. And this is because they have a variable form of functional integration, which can take, in many cases, it elevates them about being just bundles, but at the same time, it is variable in the way plastic that it also rules organisms out being substances. So therefore, I would like to invite you to think that organisms are no things at all. And this is the idea of processual animalism. So, and professional animalism in this respect is strongly supported by systems biology. I don't need to explain probably to you what systems biology is, just a very quick word. It is the integrative study of organisms as wholes rather than isolated parts. If you want to understand all the regulatory processes on all levels. And here, very important source of inspiration is systems theory, especially dynamical system theory. And so one basic insight is simply that organisms are dynamical systems which keep themselves in maintaining in a far from thermodynamical equilibrium state. And as you all know, this has been described as a kind of autopoiesis, where you get this recursive network of self-generation. So the fact that there's the membrane boundaries where the exchange of metal energy takes place permits the boundary dynamics of metabolic network, which produce the metabolites that constitute the boundaries and so on. And what you get from this picture is clearly that there's no identity of the organism beyond the production of this identity, and also no organism beyond the production of its identity. So organisms are fundamentally the process of constitution of an identity. And biological identity, possessional identity. So here's my last slide. Organisms then, according to possessional animalism, turn out to be stabilized, if you want to call them like that, autopoietic higher order processes. And I really think that this insight wipes away all the difficulties which animalism on the basis of thing-ontological framework encounters. Because now we can say, well, actually, given that organisms are these stabilized higher order processes relying on complex lower level processes, we can say, well, they actually persist as the same exactly as long as this stabilization can be maintained. And the good thing about this is that we can ask our empirical science about how this stabilization occurs. So which conditions are required in order to make it happen. And as we all know, this is very complex and also very fragile, because maintenance of stabilization doesn't come by itself. The word precarious was mentioned earlier. So every stabilization is followed by destabilization. And because of this, that we are aware of the fact that organisms, in order to make identity happen and keep it in existence, you need this unbelievably complex network of processes and the right changes to occur. I think it's clear that biological identity is neither the identity of substances nor no identity at all. So what we get instead from a processional view, the view of processional animalism, is a robust notion of biological identity which still does justice to the plasticity of many life forms. And this is because we now can talk about functional integration, which I've already had started to do. So we could, for example, talk in the case of budding and branching in these things about the degree of functional integration, which gives us an intrinsic explanation which is not essentialistic, which we had been missing in the traditional accounts. And also we could describe symbiosis as the temporary entanglement of processes, or colonial organisms as partially functionally integrated and partially overlapping processes, or superorganisms as kind of collaborating processes of demarcation from the environment. So we are provided then in this perspective with an informative account of biological identity beyond mysticism and eliminativism, which is the solution of the dilemma of personal identity. Thank you for your attention.